So I want to take a look at what happens in movement, but to start with, well, let's take a look at saying that with these ideas that we've been speaking about, we use that as something like building blocks, right? So if this guy gets really muscular or really skinny, it's the same kind of thing. We just apply the ideas in slightly different ways. So if I store a morph target, so let's say that this guy goes to the gym and puts on like 10 kilos of muscle or something like that. Well, the skeleton's going to stay the same, but the bony landmarks are going to become more depressed. The areas where the muscle turns to tendon is going to be more noticeable, right? So, but the borders of the muscle is all pretty much the same. Maybe we see a bit more of his trapezius through there. Maybe teres major starts to become like more of a function through here. And then maybe like, if he's really working on getting some width through there, maybe that all starts to push outwards through there. Something like that, but it's all the same idea. So there, the sternum is the bony landmark, so that is not going to change at all, but this is all going to grow and come outwards. So there is like, there's not like a real change in my mindset when I'm thinking about, or working anatomically with different body types. It's just different ways of distributing the same muscle mass. Like my pattern of saying, well, that's flat on top and then sharp curve underneath. Maybe that starts to break. Like when these pecs get really big, it starts to get rounded through there. As that does get rounded, just be careful about like, okay, I would say when you're dealing with muscle, be careful about C curves that you can split perfectly down the middle. Just as a concept, a curve that has symmetry to it is not a natural curve. Of course, you see C curves in the body all the time, but there's always some variety to it. It's never going to be symmetrical. So that's an example of an area where if I break that through there, I want to make sure, like, what is the difference between that and that? It could be subtle, but just thinking about that is going to allow me to sidestep that problem. I mean, I don't like making these pecs too sort of booby, but they do get that way sometimes, on some people. And then as we go through here, there's that dominant triangle through there, and then maybe we start to see like the bundling of the fibers through here. I would say, like, even when you're dealing with super muscular people, again, this rule of like not trusting any line that goes on for too long without being broken is a pretty useful rule to work with. So like, even though that muscle bundle is probably going to be doing something like that, right? So we'd be seeing that. You're not going to be able to get away with that. So as a rule, I would just lose that in the middle and allow it to be found at the edges, something like that. Then through here, same thing. The tendon stays where it is, so this all bulges around that. Now, what you see with the obliques through here is that as this starts to get developed, this kind of just fills up to become a wall of muscle through there. And here you just have that challenge of like, okay, well, you've got a repeating pattern through there, and you just can't visually allow yourself to make that pattern repeat, because it's not going to be natural. So find, like, maybe it bulges up more at the ends through there, or maybe one is thicker than another. The reference will give you your answers, but if you're working without reference, then it's just like, just figure it out for yourself, Okay, something like this. And then through here, the deltoids are another area where, like, as this all starts to get developed, as it all starts to push outwards, you can get into a land of C curves quite quickly, which I'd be careful about. But look, as like, let's say that bulks up, so we have our traps getting bigger through there, that makes the neck look smaller. Then we have our deltoids getting bigger through there. We still have this horizontal plane there, because that's coming from the clavicle and the scapula, right? So that bony landmark is the same. Whether you're muscular or not muscular or whatever, that's going to be the same. So you'll always have that break through there. There's a tendency to miss that, I think, which gives you like what I'd call like slopey shoulders, and that's not a thing that you generally see in life. So I'd recommend keeping an eye out for that. And then through here, the trapezius turns to tendon through there, turns to tendon there, turns to tendon down there. So in all of those areas, that transition is going to become more noticeable. I still want to be careful about, do I find like the teres minor there, for example? I'd still, be careful about it because we have skin on top of it, right? We have skin and we have fat, and things are going to obscure the read. So, yeah, even on like super shredded people, be careful about those smaller forms. So something like that. It's probably going to come down a little bit. And yeah, so that's, same building blocks really, right? Just manifesting themselves in a different way. And so if we go for the other extreme, I think that this area in the shoulders is a good place to explore that. So basically, like this guy now stops going to the gym, stops eating, loses however much muscle. Then the reason that's happening is I'm trying to use my own shortcut for the flatten brush. So here I'm just going to flatten all of that out, right? So suddenly that depression starts sticking out into the silhouette, right, as all of this gets flat. So the three planes that I mentioned before that you'll find in skinny people, you can see quite clearly here, right? This is the plane of the rhomboids through there. That's the plane of the scapula. That's the plane of the trapezius. So here the rhythm just becomes all about the bone. We're not interested in the serratus at all. Lumbar muscles are going to thin out. Remember that the rib cage has a massive impact on the back, so at this point here, we're probably going to start to feel individual separations of the ribs. But we'll still, like, those ribs will still be covered by the serratus. That muscle isn't going anywhere. It's just smaller. So that line is probably still going to be visible, right? These lumbar muscles will still be just as wide. They're just going to be much less bulky. Through here, excuse me, this is going to be much more about ribs. Find that. And then the pecs. This is a pattern that you'll probably be super familiar with the pecs. So when they're thin to a certain degree, we get like these cat whiskers through there. And that's the bone showing underneath the muscle. Excuse me. But then through here, we're still going to find the muscle, right? The muscle still has to originate and insert on the same place. It still has to leave the confines of the rib cage. So that all plays through in exactly the same. As the deltoid gets thinner, the rhythm of the bone dictates it a lot more. You see that bulge through there we've spoken about? That's coming from the bone. So that becomes even more prominent as that bone pushes out, and this becomes even more flat through there. Same thing from the front view through there. Well, I don't want to push this too much, but it's just this idea of like same body type. I can work with this better. Hang on. Like maybe just like so through here where I've got a very flat area through there, and I want it to feel a little bit more alive, bit more anatomical. Yeah, I'll just kind of fake it. I'll just draw in some of the muscles, and then let that all just kiss that goodbye, until it's almost completely disappeared, but not quite. So at some point I lost my morph target, but same guy, bonk, just same skeletal structure, right? We just redistribute it. Let me go back to a time when I had a morph target. Okay. And then to finish off this thought, let's see what happens when we stick fat on him, because this is something that for some reason anatomy books have just ignored for a long time. So the fatty storage on men and women is kind of different. On men, it's generally above the hip line. So this line through here can become really prominent if you've got a lot of fat back there. On women, the fat gets stored over that. So what you have is something more like that. And on women, it can look like the hips are running up really high, right? But that's the fatty store. That's also why women, like those dimples, feel really noticeable on women, because the fat kind of surrounds it, which it doesn't so much on the male. Male, the fat is stored just there. And then, of course, on the stomach and on the flanks through here. Now, like one theme or one idea that I would want to push throughout today is to go like, well, we need to break the idea of magic in anatomy, right? Of having this one sphere where that's the anatomy world that we think about, and we don't connect it to the real world, you know? And it's like, so if we're trying to break that and we're looking at fat, then we go, well, what is fat? You know, it's this kind of blobby energy store that sticks to the skin, doesn't stick to the bone, doesn't stick to the muscle, meaning that when there's an excess of it, it starts to droop down. So, like, if I'm dealing with a belly like this, right, it's that same pattern that we've looked at before, that we saw before on the pecs, right? Like, sharp curve on top, sharp line underneath. Sorry, flat line on top, sharp curve underneath. Here, flat line on top, sharp curve underneath. Like what if this was a cloth sim and this was a melon, right? That I just chucked into it. What would happen is it would drop down, but as it dropped down, it would stretch the cloth on all sides. Same kind of idea, right? So we're thinking about compression, extension, all of that good stuff. So down here, it's going to be a clear amount of compression, so that fold is going to tell us something like that. But through here, this bowling ball is stretching from all there. So actually through here, maybe we want to start to find some lines to tell us about that stretch through there. Right? We see something a little bit more like that, maybe. I mean, the way people store fat is going to be, you know, it's going to vary massively from person to person. But for males, this will get you most of the way there. Like, I would be worried about losing that rib cage too much. Oftentimes, you can still find that bottom of the 10th rib there, that landmark of the rib cage. And I'm not sure why, but you do still often have a 4-pack in fat. Right, so you kind of have that split there, you have that split down the side, and that split there. I'm not sure why that is. It's it's not coming from the muscle, but there's something there. And this break there, you'll see that in very muscular people, because that's the tendon between the obliques and the abs. For some reason, on a fatty person, someone carrying too much fat or a lot of fat, then that's still going to be visible there. Now, the fatty store in the breasts, it's pretty much the same on the male and the female. So it's here, just like right at the bottom through there, but then it carries through. If you're sculpting a breast, it's the same kind of idea. Like with a breast, you would want that feeling of the fat moving across there and the pec moving across there. It's one of those things that you hit it and suddenly like it feels like a really sophisticated sculpt, but it's not. It's just layering detail. Right now, this is the same idea as we saw on the belly. The fat is accumulating here, so that means that the tension is here, the compression is there, the extension is all the way there, right? So that means that maybe I find a sharper line through there, right? We don't tend to store fat through there, so like this read of the muscle, maybe I'll keep that, you know? Let's just push that pec towards the body a little bit. I mean, sometimes you'll see the nipples actually getting stretched out, so I like to find that detail, you know, as they get pulled out to the side, something like that. But yeah, this is basically the fatty store on the body, right? It's there, it's definitely here. This sometimes can be joined as one line sometimes. Something like that. And on females, it is going to vary a little bit. Like I say, the fatty store will come up and over the hips like that. And there's also a store through there on females. Like, there's so many of these things where it's like, when you notice them, it's like, Jesus, how did I never see that? Like that, I only found out about fairly recently. But I was telling a student of mine who was a woman of a certain age about that, and she was like, well, yeah, I know. That's like, I'm fighting against that my whole life, you know? So to her, it's super obvious because she sees it all the time. To me, it was like, well, I'd never really thought about that, never really noticed that before. But it ties in with this idea of like, anatomy is a real thing, you know? Like, you have a body, so like, if you're a female, you may be able to find that on yourself. If you're a male, you may be able to figure out how all of this works on yourself. It shouldn't just be the domain of like these super ripped guys that we use for reference. those guys are useful, but they're useful for muscle reference. And then for some reason we throw away skin and we throw away fat and we go, it's not anatomy. Like, why? Your skin covers your whole body, you know? It's a pretty decent amount. Most of us are, 20-something% fat, I think, the average. Can't remember the average, 20-something%, 30-something% for a woman. It's a pretty decent amount of fat that we're carrying. It's like there's no reason to discard that, you know? And you need that if you want to work with things in a way that feels believable and realistic. So anyway, that's as much, you know, we could investigate fat a lot further, but that's what a fat taster. So let's look at motion a little bit. So